Welcome to the Troubled Artists Podcast, Episode 10, Stephen Morgan.
Welcome back to the Troubled Artists Podcast. Today I am here with Stephen Morgan. Stephen Morgan is a British comedian, improviser, storyteller, actor, writer, musician, as featured on Australia's ABC and the UK's BBC. Stephen has toured and performed in famous comedy clubs and festivals around the world alongside acts such as Stephen Carlin, Damien and Greg Shapiro. He is one half of True to You, was a former performer and teacher with Eindhoven's Chili Con Comedy, and is the host of Real Power Talk, a comedy interview series launched in conjunction with the media company All Things Loud. And then in 2017, he ran the Brisbane Funny Fest, a comedy fringe festival in Brisbane, Australia, featuring over 100 shows over the course of just 2 weeks. So Stephen, thank you again for being on the show. So before we begin, I do like to ask this one question. Tell us, in your own words, who is Stephen Morgan?
Okay, well, thank you for the welcome. It's really nice to be here. Stephen Morgan is, well, there's lots of Stephen Morgans actually. It's really handy having a name that's relatively anonymous, means that when people Google you, that they come up with hundreds of other weird looking people who share the same name as you rather than having to be the only one. But this Stephen Morgan, I mean, like that's kind of like a vague description, isn't it? What the one that you gave is just some of the things that you've done. But I'm just someone who talks too much and just kind of gets involved with whatever thing is going to goes my way and has trouble saying no to things, really.
Nice. I am curious to know just how you got into being a improviser and performer in the first place. Was it something you found early on in life or later on in life? Just kind of go through that.
Yeah, well, it's a good question, and it's something which, I mean, honestly, I kind of got involved with a lot later because I think that it was something which I always sort of gravitated towards in my interests and like as a consumer, someone who was watching things and being interested in this sort of thing. But for the longest time, like music was my focus. I was in different bands recording and touring, and that was like what I really wanted to do and get out of things. And there was a little part of me as well that was like, if I get involved in this, and I'm bad at it, does that mean I'm just like not funny or interesting as a person? And that's kind of very existential. You make a mistake or write a bad song, have a bad gig. It's not so bad. You can kind of carry on and learn from it. But when something is so like wound up with like your own personality, it was a lot more sort of scary to think like, okay, is this something I could or shouldn't do? So it wasn't until actually I moved to Australia in 2013 that I actually really went for it in terms of like improv and stand-up, and it was definitely one of those experiences where it felt like I basically wasted time, and I really should have done this sooner. And since then, it's just been a huge part of my life, and it's sort of really taken over. And I guess the musical background and experience was useful for getting started and kind of building on that. But at the same time, it's like it's its own entirely different beast and a different world I feel like I'm in now.
Yeah, I mean, it's just really awesome, like whenever someone finds that creative passion of theirs, whether it's in improv or music, or in my case, I do film, or any person painting, writing, so it's really cool to find like that creative passion of theirs. And again, like there's no rush to it, like some people find it early in life, some people find it later in life, but once they find it, it definitely helps them become who they are and building upon it, and hopefully are successful with it in the future. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I was curious to know, like, how has living in multiple countries, because you mentioned you moved from Australia, so how has living in multiple countries helped shape your creative process?
So interestingly, I think that like a lot of the things that sort of sculpted my path were not things that I intended to do or directions I intended to go in. Like, for example, getting into performance arts outside of music was more about the fact that, like, I was in a band making electronic music, playing clubs and things like this, and my hair was going grayer, and I was just like, I don't know, this doesn't feel so like right anymore. I mean, it's, still enjoyable, but I don't know if this is us, if we are the people to be doing this. And that was around about the time that I moved to Australia. And when you move to the different side of the world and the people you know are asleep while you're awake and vice versa, suddenly you just have a lot more sort of time, space. It's like life is a lot of commitments, right? I mean, I don't just mean like bad, and I don't just mean things which are chores or hard work, but even keeping in touch with people, you know, friends and things like this. It's something that takes time and mental energy, and something that, you know, you want to do, but at the same time, you know, there's only so many hours in a day. So there was a sort of strangely liberating thing to move to Australia and have this sort of complete disconnect from your life. It's almost like a reboot, which I guess is something that people go through these sorts of things at various points in their lives. But I didn't. Usually by the, you know, your 20s, you've established certain roots and things like this. So it was a sort of interesting thing to basically ask some questions of like, well, what do I want to do? And what are the benefits of being here? And how do you make the most of this situation, which could be tricky, could be challenging, could be difficult. So it just really just gave me the opportunity to throw myself into these new things to try. And I also started Taekwondo as well, which I did quite a few different belts there. That was the third sort of less, I guess that was more for fitness as well, but it was also just something new, you know? It's just like this whole kind of mindset of like, yeah, why not? You know, never done something like that before. Admittedly, I don't do that one anymore, but the other two I'm still very much involved with.
Nice. I think it's good, yeah, to have other hobbies as well, because, you know, like as artists, you know, we can't be creative like, you know, at every point in our lives, you know, like there's going to be moments where, you know, like the writing just stops, or like the ideas just kind of stop, you know, so we kind of do have to sometimes just step back and, you know, like you said, reboot and, you know, do something else, you know, and it's not because that we don't want to do it anymore. It's just because we need that sort of mental break from being like creative all the time. So, you know, like you said, you know, we do Taekwondo for fitness, you know, or traveling the world, you know, or, you know, there's just so many other things to do in life, you know,
Yeah.
that can help improve like our mindset and kind of just give us a new like look on things, like just like a fresh perspective on how we look at things and how we can continue to write something new and creative.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, actually, because I do think it's something I kind of have noticed as well, like doing this for quite a few years now, is that whatever discipline you're involved in, that there's always like a little bit of a sort of imposter syndrome whenever you know, as you're doing it more, as you're getting, it's just kind of a very human thing to have at various points. But the fact is that when you're coming to something from a very different perspective than the people around you, it can really make it harder to feel like I belong here. Because, you know, say, so like if I'm looking at improv in particular, there's a lot of people coming at that background with theatre or like in other various forms of arts and directors and things like this. And I'm just coming at it as some guy who used to like write songs and perform songs. But there's also like a real like gift in when you can bring that very different perspective from the people around you. It's like, sure, you'll have like shortcomings, certain things that people will talk about, and you'll just be like, what are they talking about? You know, do I ask? Because everyone else seems to know. Maybe I'll just Google it later, whatever, I don't know. But then there are other aspects which you're just like, well, I don't know, like I've had all these other lived experiences, all these other things that have come along the way, and now I'm looking at things from a very different perspective than others. And, you know, I think that's a really powerful thing and a really difficult thing to kind of hold on to. But it's something which I think it's always good in these worlds to get the people who, you know, are looking out at everything in the world. You know what I mean? Like you want a painter who's like a master at their craft, but they also have inspiration on what they want to create. You know, if someone's just like this perfect painter, you know, like technically, and they can reproduce every amazing work of art, like in the like photo quality detail, that's great, but they're never going to surprise you. They're never going to challenge you. They're never going to bring something more. So, and that to me, I think is something which it's, you should never forget, and it's really important, and it really does help people sort of stand out as individuals.
Absolutely. We're always learning as creatives. We're always looking at, like you say, inspiration of other people, and like we do have like those moments of, how you said, imposter syndrome, and I've had that. I've had that too, because being like in film, in high school, I was like the only person kind of pursuing that. And then when I went to film school, I was just surrounded by so many other creative people and, like writer, producers, cinematographers, so it was very like overwhelming at first. But, once I found like the right like crew, and, we started to talk and working together and started to create great content, I felt much better as a director and writer, and that this goes for just any other artist, like working with other creatives, artists, painters, or whoever it may be. So yeah, it's just good to have that community. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. And you did mention, like, you're obviously that you do improv. So in what ways has improvisation helped enhance your approach to storytelling?
Well, yeah, it's funny, like, because storytelling, I think, is, well, as you're talking about film, and it's such a core part of, like, well, life. Essentially, it's like how we communicate. It's how we kind of get ideas across to each other. And I think that, well, one of the things that I do love about the Netherlands is there's a real kind of scene or a passion, and like the people who see storytelling as like a public form. I know you got the Moth in the US, and so there's a school of storytelling called Mesrab here in Amsterdam. Now there's a second venue that started, and it's started by some incredible people. It's a really, really amazing place. I recommend anyone who goes to Amsterdam to check out Mesrab. It's quite different to anything I think I've experienced anyway. It's a very family vibe, even though it's not a family, the people who there at the core are families, but it's a real sort of part of the fabric of just, how people are and how people interact here. And it's not just something which I think has roots in like the comedy side of things. Of course, you can have a funny story, but it's got so much more, so much richer, so many different angles. And in terms of storytelling, in terms of like actually trying to find whatever it is that you want to convey, whatever truth that is, whether you understand it or not, or whatever you're trying to work out that you want to share, I think that improv is just such a kind of really amazing thing to sort of unblock some of those like walls or blocks or whatever it is that is within you that makes it feel more difficult than it has to be or is. And I just think that a lot of the time, I mean, I don't know if everyone can relate to this, but for me, it's like there's always a voice in the back of your head of just like, something has to be perfect, something has to be resculpted. You don't want people to even see like a first, second, or even a final draft of something, because you're worried that like that piece of negative feedback will just like spiral you into not even wanting to carry on anymore. You really want to get that momentum as much as you can. And so I just find it's such a great way of just letting go, of just trying to find new angles and approaches to things, of just being a bit more sort of throwaway and sort of less precious about the things that are going on. And so it's just because I feel like in that way, when you allow that, when you sort of set that as a way of like exploring new ideas, then you don't feel so bad when you just do something ridiculous or just that's completely off the point or just doesn't work and falls flat. It's like, yeah, we know that's the whole point of improv. That's where we're going with this. So I think it's a really useful tool in that, depending on like what your own personal like blockages are, but for me it's been really good on so many different levels.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've worked with several actors and stuff that had like that theater background and improv, and it's just a great way to just think on your feet, like just kind of thinking of like new scenarios and stuff. And I think that's really cool. Like, I mean, I don't think I could ever do something like that, 'cause I just feel like like as a director, I need to like kind of set a plan and like look at stuff from a wide angle, but because I remember I did take like some acting classes back then here and there, but it was like pretty difficult. So I do applaud you and other actors and improv improvisations out there, that are able to do that. So that's really cool. But yeah, like I do like how you said like some people are kind of so focused on being so perfect like with their work, and I've had this conversation with other writers and like even filmmakers before, just like they're so concerned about, like how you said, like getting like that negative feedback, that they'll kind of just quit and do something else because they're so worked up about like it being perfect, or like worried about like, oh, what if they don't like it, what if this, what if that, and you just kind of have to like just release it to the world, show them what you got. And and this is going to happen, like people are going to really love it and people are not going to love it, like that's just part of the world, that's part of being an artist, it's part of who we are. And I feel like that's just important to have, like, like not everything can be perfect, because if everything's perfect, we won't learn and we won't continue to like take like ideas from other people and kind of just make something new. And like I said, just have like a different perspective on things, because someone can give you like a really great idea or a little like thing you could do for next time that you never would have thought of, and it's like, oh, that's really cool, and then you do it for the next film, and then you gradually get better over time. So it is really important to, like I said, like learn and not be so perfect all the time, because you can start to create bigger and better things. So that's
Yeah.
really awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing as well. I think that in terms of like learning, like that key point of just like picking something up new, I also find that like in terms of any sort of artistic expression, when you're learning something for the first time, might be like learning a new instrument, might be like learning how to play something different. You have this kind of like creative lightning that happens in that moment, because not only are you like learning and turning something into being able to make some sounds out of it, but also you are taking all of your experience and ideas, and now you're sort of like having this completely different angle that you're coming at it from, and it can just really sort of like set you on fire in terms of different ideas, new things, and you just end up sort of playing around with all these things. And you're like, yeah, I'm going to try this, I'm going to try that, and it's a really sort of inspirational tool. And it's something which, yeah, also is kind of very easy to be terrified of, because, of course, if you're learning a new instrument, for example, you're clearly not going to be the most proficient or best person out there at this. But you look at so many examples out there of artists who have just basically kind of said, I'm going to work with this thing that I don't know very well, and I'm going to do what I can with it, and I'm going to, get help for the things that I need around it, but I'm going to use that as my impetus to try and challenge myself to something new. And it creates some of the best things, it creates things where you see these approaches which just would otherwise never have happened. If you're just like the perfect person at this particular way of doing something, there are rules, there are things you cannot do, there are things that you have to do it this way. But when you're starting something new, you're just like, what happens if I try this? What happens if I'm putting some distortion on this, some reverb? I don't know. I'm going to do that. And these are the sorts of things which just really can like unlock like so many different and exciting ways of approaching things.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like unlocking that creativity is just, I remember it's just like such a freeing feeling, like when I first discovered my love of film, it was like such an amazing feeling, and just like learning to, take like the feedback and stuff like that. Once I learned to accept that, it was just better. It just helped me better as a person, to look at, things from a different perspective. And how you said, like with music, like picking up a new instrument and learning it, it's just really, really cool. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. So I did saw that in 2017 that you ran the Breeze Funny Fest, which like was like you said, like 100 shows in just 2 weeks. So that was like, oh wow, that's really impressive. So what inspired you to take over the Breeze Funny Fest, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, that was another sort of thing that I never planned or intended on being involved with. So it's the Briz Funny Fest, so short for Brisbane, which is where it was located, and it was just someone else who had who had been running it and was moving to the UK and was looking for someone to sort of take over the festival itself. And as I'm sure you've encountered yourself, is that a lot of people who are involved in sort of like the arts, not always necessarily kind of like people with the most sort of organizational skills, consistency, turning up for things, and this kind of these particular sort of things which are really necessary for making something like that happen. And so the organizer said, look, you're just like the person who's relatively seems to have your shit together. And I was like, okay, I'll take that as a compliment. That's fine with me. But I have to admit, I was also like, look, I don't know how this sort of thing works. I've never done anything like this before. I never had ambitions to do something like this before, but at the same time, of course, I've been an audience member. I've partaken in these, I've performed in these sorts of things. But I was like, okay, how different can it be to actually organize and make this thing happen? And I think that what was lucky in this sense, from my perspective, is that with so many of these things, and I think when you step into a world that like you don't know so much about, there are already so many people out there who know what they're doing, who know the thing that they specialize in. You're talking about like working in film. Everyone is an expert of their particular field. When you're the person who's in charge, a lot of the time it's kind of like, okay, I just need to sort of like almost cheerlead and make sure that these people have got what they need and like have got answers to their questions and have got whatever it is going to be able to make them do their job best. Because right now I'm kind of like, I know what it is that we're supposed to do. I know my limitations in my experience, my knowledge, and what the hell is going on. But these people have got so many like amazing ideas and like know how things go. I'm more learning from them, and I want to do whatever I can to sort of like get out of their way for the exciting parts, but also then sort of, try and work out in between the lines. It's like, well, what can I do? What can I help with? What can I kind of push them to, or push people that they're making it more difficult for them? So it was a kind of fun experience in the sense that I thought it was going to be one thing. I thought it was going to be much more sort of involved, where I would have to be like making some really sort of difficult core decisions and stressing myself out. But it's just like with so many things, when you sort of collaborate with people who know what they're doing, or it's a lot of the time you just need to try and find a way to make them be the best person that they can possibly be. And frankly, even though it was probably more time consuming and quite involved, it actually felt a lot easier than when you're the one who's having to come up with a creative output.
Yeah. I think it's like, it's also important to, have like that sort of mentor, to kind of go back to and, help to refuel like your creative energy, and it goes back to, just having the support from your family or friends or people that you worked with in the past, or the teachers that you've learned from in school, or in my case in film school, kind of going back to them and just kind of learning, or just kind of, because like you said, like we never stop learning. We're always kind of taking inspiration from other people and kind of just like making our own thing. We try to do something like really creative. Like I said, we need like that feedback, and we need that different perspective on like, okay, like what do you think of this, what do you think of that, and like you get like some really good ideas. So I feel like it is important to have like that finding that right community of people, and sometimes it could be challenging for other people. Like if you don't go to like say film school, if you're a filmmaker, or you have people that don't support your dreams, it's definitely, there's people like that out there, but they don't let those obstacles stop them, because if they truly love something, they're going to find a way to get through it. There's going to be all these, negative things that happen in life, because, life happens, there's good days, there's bad days, but, once we find that creative passion of ours, we're going to find a way to, like, to avoid like these obstacles and stuff, and try to find a way to continue our dreams. So I think that is also very important. I am curious to know, like, how does music influence your comedic work, and vice versa? How does your comedic work influence your music? Since I know you do both.
Yeah, I mean, like, because I had such a sort of distinct progression of basically spending all time dedicated to music, and then like almost switching overnight to more performance arts based, stand up and improv. It was I think it's in some ways it's like there's so many similarities, but in some ways there's so many differences. I think the general things we've been talking about today, it's like there's so many sort of common things in terms of creativity and in terms of like creating something out of nothing. And I think that there's a lot of that which has kind of been kind of useful and carried over. So for example, when I talk about improv, and that's something which from a musical perspective, the bands that I've been in, there's a lot of songwriting that's come from just basically getting a practice room, making noise and working out what ideas are good and which ideas are not. And that's just kind of like a preferred way of working, which, well, makes a lot of sense considering where I've ended up. That's just the way that my brain works. Some people much prefer to be on their own in a particular environment, but that's just doesn't work for me. I get too distracted too easily. So there's, those little things that you kind of keep drawing parallels to because it's what your experience is, what you notice is similar and what you notice is different. But in terms of like the music itself, I mean, so for me, because I know there's such a thing, for example, as musical improv. But for me, I've always sort of struggled with that side of things when you bring these two things together, because like, in terms of creating something, in terms of creating music, I am very fussy on what I consume and what I have and what I am interested in putting out there. And I know that there's a sort of real skill to this, and like improvisation is a real core of the part of songwriting, of creating and things like this. But I'm like, oh, come on, guys, let's keep it like to ourselves until we get to a place where it's actually, worth consuming. Because even if you look at say recorded musical comedy, so for example, something like Lonely Island or Tim Minchin, something like this, even that in general, like I find like a lot of the time, if you take a traditional song structure and then you apply like the one joke or whatever it is, or maybe two jokes, and you sort of spin that out and it lasts the full 3 or 4 minutes, I'm often kind of like, okay, for the first 15 seconds I thought this was quite funny, but now I've discovered we've got another 3 minutes 45 of this, and I'm like, the joke is done, I'm done, we're good. Mm-hmm. But it's like, and I suppose of those examples I gave, you get someone like Lonely Island, for example, who genuinely like loved the music that they were pastiching, which I thought actually elevated it to another level, because that's something where it's like, clearly it's not just, they're trying to make good songs that also happen to be funny. And that, I think, is the important thing, is that if you take two things, don't just think that because one of them is like pretty good that you can disregard the other. So I've, a lot of musical stuff I've done is very like no more than like 10, 15, 20 seconds long. Because I'm like, I made the point. Repetition, great in dance music, great in so many places, in musical places. But if I'm making a joke, I'm like, yeah, we're done. We can move on, go on to another thing. And to me, that also is so much funnier when you just abruptly stop something, because, music always has like an elevated level of like, you think, oh, something's going to happen. Okay, we've moved on. Which itself could be quite funny.
Yeah, absolutely. I do remember listening to Lonely Island. Like, they're definitely really good. Like, I'm on a boat. They have like all these great songs. But yeah, no, I think it's just really cool just to have like, like taking both comedy and music and like putting it together, and, just like having like multiple creative outlets, I do think is like really cool. Some people like to do multiple things. Like they maybe in some cases they like to film, or they also like to draw, or they like to paint, like, so there's so many different, creative outlets out there. And I think it just goes back to, like people that are kind of a little scared about like doing something new, because it definitely, it can be very daunting to, to everybody doing something new. It doesn't involve just artists, and, sometimes you just have to like just jump in, you kind of have to just do it. And if it doesn't work, okay, that's fine. At least you tried it. You can, do something else. But I think it's important to always try something new and to just find that creativity, find something, even if you don't do it full time as a career or something. I think it's just important to have that sort of just like on the side, because again, I think it just helps us make up who we are, and just continuing to do that. Because like I said, some things in life just happen. There's going to be bad days, and just kind of having something, that creativity on the side, just kind of helps you stay positive and just continuing to look towards like the better days that are gonna be in our lives. So it's just important to have that creativity.
Yeah, and honestly, I think the one thing on that subject, 'cause I couldn't agree with you more in terms of like, you will notice a difference in your life if you are just consuming or just, giving but not creating. And I think that one thing I find, well, like I'm better at saying this, I'm not so good at doing it in practice, but a lot of the time, like you should just be creative for the sake of it, like not have a goal, not feel like the thing that you are making or working on is going to ever see the light of day. Because a lot of the time it's easy to sort of put like unnecessary pressure on yourself to get to a point where you just feel like, I don't know, you lose focus on why it is you're doing it in the first place, feeling the stress to make that completion. Whereas, it's just fun to just make something that's, you'll throw away afterwards. It's just the whole process is much more important. And honestly, in my experience, when I do have that attitude, I've generally made something far more interesting than when I've sort of aimed to kind of meet a particular, achieve a particular thing and then just try to work towards that. Usually it's a case of I'm just going to do something, and then just luckily, one time out of 100, that thing happens to be a really good thing. And you're like, actually, I'm going to finish this off. And it's just so much more of a healthy way to look at things, so much less pressure on yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have like any like last minute advice that you want to share to any up and coming artists out there that may be listening to this podcast?
I mean, I think things are harder than ever, right? Because on the one hand, there's more opportunities than ever, but on the other hand, it's like it doesn't matter what field you're in. You're not just responsible for whatever it is that you find interesting, but you're responsible for how you're conveyed on every level, every different facet in terms of like social media, in terms of what you are sharing out there, thoughts, opinions, where you're sharing them, how often, and things like this. It just becomes so overwhelming. And genuinely, I don't know how some people do it. I'm not so prolific myself because I just find it very draining. But I just think that like the key thing is just always kind of gravitate towards the things that like really like get you excited, because the fact is like there's always going to be opportunities that come up, some of them more interesting than others, some of them are going to be kind of like more lucrative than others, frankly, some of and things like this. And there's always going to be a temptation to feel like this thing that's you've just been offered or has just happened is like the last time this will ever be an opportunity, and if you say no to it or you pass on it, then these other potential opportunities won't happen, and that suddenly it's like I've just got to do this, and I'm not in the right headspace, I'm overcommitted, whatever it is. But like there is a real power in just being clear and just being like, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to pass on this, or this is not right for me at this time, or maybe another time, but I've got too many other commitments, whatever it is. And if you're anything like me, it's just trying to find that space to sort of like prioritize what matters and to really think about those sorts of things, rather than just throwing yourself into everything and anything and feeling like, because I feel like there's always going to be something out there that's going to be demanding your attention or needs. And the most important thing is you got to look after yourself, right? It's like you got to be able to pay bills, to put a roof over your head, to have food. So these sorts of things are just far more like important. And then when you have your limited time, just think about, what can I spend that time on? What do I want to spend that time on? It's far more important to do something that's going to make you happy than to do something that you just feel like, oh, this is quite popular, but has no connection with who I am.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is important to have that. Well, if there's anything else you want to talk about, anything that kind of comes to mind, is there anything else that you want to like say before we kind of sign off?
Yeah, no, just like this has been a really nice conversation. I feel like it's like a lot of these things I feel are just things that I often find when I talk to people about it. It's just anyone in a creative field. It's just so much resonance, because everyone has differences in terms of their approach, what matters to them, things like this. But there's so much that like within us all that's so common, and sometimes it's just nice to kind of share with someone, to share and sort of explain and just hear someone else as well say things that are also in your head, because then it's just like, oh, thank God it's not just me. That's that itself is a powerful thing. But no, this has been great, and I really appreciate the questions. Really thoughtful and really nice.
Thank you for tuning in to the Troubled Artists podcast. Have a great day.